The Shadow Protocol Admiral Sophia Reyes stood before the holographic display in her command center on Mars Station, watching data streams that made her blood run cold. The reports coming in from the frontier weren't just concerning, they were impossible. She had served in the Earth Defense Force for 30 years, risen through the ranks during humanity's expansion into the stars, and thought she understood the nature of warfare. But these reports suggested something else entirely was happening at the edges of human space. The Krillian Empire had been testing humanity's defenses for months, probing for weaknesses along the border systems. Their scouts had mapped human fleet positions, analyzed patrol patterns, and calculated the exact force needed to overwhelm Earth's colonies. By every military calculation, they should have succeeded in their raids. Instead, their ships were disappearing without explanation, their ground forces found dead with no sign of battle, and their survivors spoke of enemies that couldn't possibly exist. Reyes pulled up the latest incident report from the Arcturus system. 3 days ago, a Krillian raiding party had attacked the research station there. The station's defense consisted of 12 security officers with standard weapons, facing 40 Krillian warriors with plasma rifles and combat armor. The battle should have lasted minutes with a predictable outcome. Instead, the security footage showed something that defied explanation. The Krillians had breached the outer hull and were advancing through the corridors when the temperature readings began fluctuating wildly. The security officers reported feeling an intense cold that their environmental suits couldn't explain. Then the lights flickered, not from damage but from some kind of interference that shouldn't have been possible. The Krillian warriors stopped, advancing, and began firing at targets the cameras couldn't see. They shouted warnings in their language about enemies in the walls, in the ceiling, everywhere and nowhere at once. Within 4 minutes, all 40 Krillian warriors were dead. The security footage showed their bodies falling one by one, precise wounds appearing without any visible cause. No shots were fired by the human defenders. No additional personnel were recorded entering the station. The 12 security officers survived without firing a single round, and when questioned, they could only describe a presence they felt, but never saw. A cold that penetrated their bones and the certainty that something was protecting them. Commander Zektar of the Krillian Intelligence Division had spent weeks analyzing these incidents. His species prided themselves on their analytical capabilities, their ability to understand and counter any threat. But the patterns he was seeing made no logical sense. Human military forces were accounted for in every engagement, their positions tracked, their capabilities well documented. Yet battles were being won by forces that didn't appear in any database, that left no energy signatures, no DNA evidence, no proof they had ever existed except for the bodies they left behind. The commander's investigation led him to examine older conflicts, searching for similar patterns. He found them scattered throughout human military history, dismissed as anomalies or classified beyond his access level. There were mentions of special operations that succeeded against impossible odds, enemy positions that fell without explanation, and soldiers who reported being saved by allies who vanished before they could be thanked. The humans called them different names in different eras, but one designation appeared repeatedly in intercepted communications: the vanishing units. Meanwhile, at Mining Colony 7 in the Castor system, Captain Marcus Webb was facing his own impossible situation. His garrison of 50 soldiers was all that stood between 2,000 colonists and a Thraxian assault force 10 times their size. The Thraxians had chosen their target well, attacking during a solar storm that prevented communications with the fleet. Webb had sent his civilians into the deep mine shafts and prepared his soldiers for a last stand they couldn't hope to win. The Thraxians advanced with their usual methodical precision, their heavy walkers crushing defensive positions while their infantry units swept through the colony structures. Webb's soldiers fought with desperate courage, making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. But the mathematics of war were absolute. They were losing, and everyone knew it. Private Jennifer Kim had already written her final message home, saved in her suit's memory for whoever might find her body. She crouched behind a collapsed wall, her rifle nearly empty, watching Thraxian warriors advance on her position. Then, everything changed. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming hard to breathe despite her suit's life support functioning normally. Her heads-up display showed impossible readings. Atmospheric pressure spikes that shouldn't exist in the colony's artificial environment, electromagnetic interference that followed no known pattern, and temperature drops that defied the laws of thermodynamics. Kim watched through her scope as the advancing Thraxians suddenly stopped, their warriors looking around in confusion. The first Thraxian fell without a sound, a precise hole appearing in his armor at a weak point that should have been invisible to anyone without detailed technical knowledge. The second warrior managed to raise his weapon before something struck him from behind, dropping him instantly. The third tried to run but made it only 3 steps before collapsing. Within seconds, an entire Thraxian squad was eliminated by an enemy they never saw. Captain Webb watched from his command post as similar scenes played out across the colony. Thraxian units that should have overwhelmed human positions were being systematically destroyed by invisible attackers. His tactical display showed enemy forces retreating in disorder, their disciplined advance becoming a panicked flight. The solar storm was still blocking communications, preventing him from calling for reinforcement. Yet somehow reinforcements had arrived. After the battle, when the Thraxians had fled and the colonists emerged from the mines, Webb found something that shouldn't have existed. In the colony's data center, someone had left a message in the secure military channel, despite the solar storm making such communication impossible. The message was simple. Colony 7 secured. No further action required. Conventional forces performed admirably under impossible circumstances. It was unsigned, untraceable, and according to the computer logs had never been sent at all. Captain Sarah Chen had been commanding the patrol ship Horizon during what should have been a routine survey mission when her ship encountered a Vexen battle group. The Vexens were known for their advanced technology and brutal tactics, and Chen's single patrol ship stood no chance against 3 heavy cruisers. She had prepared to transmit Earth's location to the enemy in exchange for her crew's lives, a decision that would haunt her regardless of the outcome. But as she opened communications to surrender, her bridge lost all power. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red, but the temperature plummeted so fast that frost formed on the viewports. Chen could see her breath despite the bridge being supposedly sealed and climate-controlled. Her crew reported similar conditions throughout the ship, along with a sensation they couldn't quite describe, like being watched by something just outside their peripheral vision. Then the viewports cleared, and Chen saw the impossible. The 3 Vexen cruisers were being torn apart. Not by weapons fire or explosions, but by surgical strikes that disabled their key systems with impossible precision. Their shields, supposedly impregnable to anything in humanity's arsenal, flickered and died. Their weapons arrays went dark one by one. Their engines failed in sequence, leaving them drifting helpless in space. And through it all, Chen's sensors showed nothing. No ships, no missiles, no energy signatures of any kind. The lead Vexen cruiser tried to ram the Horizon in a desperate final attack, but it suddenly veered off course, its bridge exploding from within. The second cruiser launched escape pods, but its self-destruct system activated before the pods could clear, destroying the ship and everyone aboard. The third cruiser simply went dark, its entire crew of 800 found dead when salvage teams arrived days later, all killed simultaneously by a method the medical examiners couldn't identify. Chen's after-action report was classified immediately, but not before she added a personal note. She wrote about the presence she had felt on her bridge, something that terrified her more than the Vexen battle group ever could. It wasn't malevolent, she insisted, but it was absolutely inhuman in its efficiency, its willingness to kill without hesitation or mercy. It protected humanity not out of kindness but out of purpose, and that purpose didn't require it to be seen, known, or understood. Across human space, similar reports multiplied. Enemy forces encountered impossible resistance. Alien commanders reported fighting ghosts. Human soldiers survived battles they should have lost, saved by allies who didn't officially exist. The pattern was becoming too obvious to ignore. Humanity had something beyond its conventional military, something that operated in shadows and silence, something that turned the tide of battles without leaving a trace. The aliens began calling them Earth's ghosts, the invisible army, the shadow soldiers. But in encrypted human communications, carefully hidden from official records, they had another name, The vanishing units. They were humanity's answer to a hostile galaxy, a force that existed outside the rules of conventional warfare, beyond the reach of treaties and conventions. They were the nightmare that protected humanity's dreams, the darkness that guarded the light. When ghosts go to war, the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Council convened an emergency session aboard the neutral station Harmony Point. Representatives from 73 species gathered in the vast amphitheater, their forms as diverse as their worlds of origin. Crystalline beings hummed with harmonic frequencies, gaseous entities swirled in containment fields, and dozens of other species filled the tiered seating. But all attention focused on the human delegation's empty seats. Ambassador Elena Martinez was deliberately arriving last, a calculated move in the diplomatic game about to unfold. High Chancellor Vormoth of the Dominion Alliance rose to address the assembly, his 6 arms spread in a gesture of authority. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, making them naturally imposing. But today even his massive frame seemed diminished by the weight of what he had to say. The evidence was undeniable. Human military forces were operating outside all known conventions, using methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The mysterious deaths, the impossible victories, the enemies that struck from nowhere and vanished without trace. The galaxy demanded answers. Martinez entered the chamber precisely as Vormoth finished his opening statement. She was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching the chest of most species present, but she moved with the confidence of someone who held cards no one else could see. Her security detail remained at the door, a gesture of trust that everyone recognized as calculated. She took her position at the speaker's platform and waited for silence. The accusations came immediately. The Krillian representative presented forensic evidence from 17 different incidents. The Vexans showed footage of their ships being destroyed by invisible attackers. The Thraxians displayed autopsy reports of warriors killed by methods their scientists couldn't explain. Each species added their testimony to a growing mountain of evidence that humanity was fielding forces that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist yet demonstrably did. Martinez listened to it all without expression, taking notes on a digital pad with practiced calm. When the last accusation had been made and the assembly fell silent, she looked up and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the expression of a predator that had allowed itself to be surrounded, knowing it was never truly in danger. She began to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. She reminded them of humanity's history, how they had emerged from a world where survival required adaptation, innovation, and sometimes terrible choices. She spoke of how humans had been welcomed into the galactic community, with smiles that hid calculations of conquest, how every species present had assessed Earth's military capabilities and found them wanting. She noted how many border disputes and misunderstandings had coincidentally targeted human colonies, always just below the threshold that would trigger alliance obligations. The assembly grew restless as Martinez continued, her words cutting through diplomatic niceties to expose uncomfortable truths. Every species present had tested humanity's defenses. Everyone had pushed to see how far they could go before Earth pushed back. And now when that pushback came in forms they didn't understand, they cried foul and demanded explanations for weapons they couldn't comprehend and forces they couldn't see. High Chancellor Vormoth interrupted, demanding direct answers about the vanishing units. Martinez's response was simple. She neither confirmed nor denied their existence. Instead, she posed a question that silenced the assembly. If such forces existed, if humanity had developed ways to defend itself that transcended conventional military doctrine, wouldn't that be exactly what a species surrounded by potential threats would need to survive? Before the debate could continue, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The Krillian Empire, tired of diplomatic delays, had launched a massive offensive against Earth's core worlds. 5 full battle fleets comprising over 3,000 ships had jumped simultaneously into human space. It was the largest military action in a generation, designed to force humanity to reveal its true capabilities or face annihilation. Colonel David Thompson commanded Earth's defensive line at Proxima Station when the Krillian fleets arrived. His forces were outnumbered 30-1, facing weapons and shields decades more advanced than anything humanity officially possessed. He had 40 minutes before the enemy reached effective weapons range, 40 minutes to prepare for a battle that every tactical simulation said he couldn't win. Thompson gathered his officers and told them the truth. They would hold as long as possible, make the enemy pay for every kilometer, and trust that Earth had contingencies for situations like this. The battle began conventionally enough. Human ships fought with desperate courage, using hit-and-run tactics to slow the Krillian advance. Fighters launched suicide runs against capital ships. Defensive platforms overloaded their reactors to take enemies with them. It was heroic, it was tragic, and it was ultimately futile. The Krillians pressed forward, their superior numbers and technology grinding down human resistance. Then the temperature began to drop. Not in the ships, where climate control maintained life support, but in space itself. Sensors registered impossible readings, patches of absolute zero appearing and disappearing without cause, quantum fluctuations that shouldn't exist outside a laboratory, gravitational anomalies that defied physics. The Krillian fleet commanders reported increasing equipment failures, but their sensors showed no incoming attacks. The first Krillian dreadnought died silently. One moment it was advancing with shields at full power, the next it was drifting dark and lifeless. No explosion, no breach in the hull, just 3,000 crew members dead in an instant. The second dreadnought tried to retreat but found its jump drive mysteriously offline. It managed to transmit a partial distress signal before suffering the same fate. The third dreadnought's captain ordered random evasive maneuvers, firing at empty space, trying to hit an enemy that might not even exist. Across the entire Krillian fleet, similar scenes played out. Ships died without warning. Crews reported seeing shadows that shouldn't exist in the void of space. Weapons fired at nothing and hit nothing, while invisible forces tore through shields and armor as if they weren't there. The organized invasion became a rout, then a massacre. Within 6 hours, the largest military force assembled in a generation was reduced to drifting hulks and escape pods. Colonel Thompson watched it all from his command center. His own forces having pulled back after the temperature drops began, his crew was silent, watching destruction on a scale that shouldn't have been possible. They had all heard rumors about the vanishing units, whispered stories in bars and bunks, but seeing them in action was different. It was watching death itself take form, or rather not take form. It was knowing that humanity had created something that even humans feared. The psychological impact on the Krillian Empire was immediate and devastating. Their soldiers, bred for war and trained from birth, began refusing deployment orders. Reports spread through their military of human ghosts that killed without being seen, of weapons that physics said couldn't exist, of enemies that weren't bound by the laws of reality. The Empire's morale collapsed not from defeat but from fear of an enemy they couldn't understand, couldn't fight, couldn't even prove existed. Other species took notice. The Vexan Republic quietly withdrew all forces from disputed territories. The Thraxian Confederation signed trade agreements heavily favorable to Earth. The Dominion Alliance proposed new treaties that recognized humanity's right to defend itself by any means necessary. The galaxy had learned what happened when Earth's conventional forces were pushed too far. They discovered that behind the visible military was something else, something that didn't follow rules because it didn't officially exist. Ambassador Martinez returned to the Galactic Council a week after the Krillian invasion failed. The assembly that had demanded answers now avoided her gaze. The questions about vanishing units were no longer asked. The evidence that had seemed so important was quietly archived and classified. The galaxy had received its answer not in words but in demonstration. Humanity would defend itself, and the methods it used were not subject to approval or understanding. In her closing statement to the Council, Martinez spoke about the nature of survival in a hostile universe. She talked about evolution, adaptation, and the necessity of developing new strategies when faced with extinction. She never mentioned the vanishing units by name, never confirmed their existence, but her message was clear. Earth would protect its people by whatever means necessary, and those means included forces that operated beyond conventional understanding. The vote to recognize Earth's expanded defense rights passed unanimously. No species wanted to test what other secrets humanity might be hiding. The vanishing units had achieved their ultimate objective not through the battles they won, but through the fear they created. They had become a deterrent more powerful than any fleet, a warning that attacking humanity meant facing not just their visible military, but something far worse. In the months that followed, a new balance emerged in the galaxy. Disputes with human colonies were resolved diplomatically. Trade agreements became more equitable. The aggressive testing of Earth's defenses ceased entirely, The galaxy had learned to fear not Earth's army, but Earth's ghosts, and in the shadows between the stars, the vanishing units continued their vigil, unseen and unacknowledged, the nightmare that kept humanity's enemies at bay. The universe had discovered that humans were dangerous not just because they refused to surrender, not just because they fought harder when wounded, but because they had created something that transcended conventional warfare entirely. They had created forces that existed in the space between reality and impossibility, soldiers who weren't bound by physics or visibility or even existence itself. Earth's army was feared, but Earth's ghosts were terror itself.